They are on election night, but in due course, the people we have come to admire in our history are not necessarily the biggest vote getters. So I think that what we did in '72, and I know that there are people here tonight who were in that campaign, I think that we set a standard that perhaps we didn't interpret as well or as clearly as we should, but nevertheless a standard that gave millions of Americans hope at a time when they were otherwise discouraged about conditions in the country. One other thing I would say before we get into the problem of hunger here this evening is that I learned during long years in Washington that it's not always the officials high in our government that have the best insight into the problems that face the country. Even the so-called best and the brightest can sometimes be dreadfully wrong about the way they assess important problems. The Vietnam War is a classic example of that. I was participating in a hearing one day with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and the witness was Dean Rusk, the Secretary of State, a Rhodes Scholar, a man with years and years experience in international affairs, in foreign policy, in our relationships with the rest of the world. And yet, as it turned out, he and others like him, high in that administration, had a dreadful misconception of what the realities were in Vietnam. And so we engaged there for some 12, 15 years in this misadventure that killed 58,000 young Americans and an estimated 2 million Vietnamese. Once we got our army out of Vietnam, we were told that all kinds of catastrophes would befall that country and our own position in the world. But once we got our army out of there, the Vietnamese became our friends almost overnight. I was there a few years ago and talking to an audience about this size, and they spent most of the time throwing questions at me, and I'll give you a chance to do that later on. I said to them after fielding questions for quite a while, I would like to ask you a question, this crowd. I'm a bomber pilot from World War II, so I know something about bombing operations and what they can do. We dropped more bombs on your little country, that little strip of jungle territory, than were dropped by all the air forces of all the countries combined in the Second World War. How is it then that you treat us so warmly? On my mission and now every place we've gone here, we've been warmly treated. What's the explanation for that? And they said, well, Senator, we never had anything against the American people. We've always admired America. Your Constitution, your Bill of Rights. We ourselves, when we declared our independence, we copied your Declaration of Independence, word for word, except for one word. Jefferson said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We changed that to all people are created equal. I used to tell my daughters, one of whom is here tonight, who would get discouraged about these long years in Vietnam, well, look, there's some things even in a tragic situation like Vietnam, sometimes something good materializes from that. And I think what may happen here is this. It's such an obvious and horrible blunder that we'll never again repeat that anywhere in the world. I don't know what to say now. My daughters, as I watch us go step by step, foot by foot into the same kind of a hopeless morass that we were in Vietnam. But I still haven't given up on the American political system. I've always thought this is the greatest country on earth. I still do. We must be great. We make these horrible mistakes, and yet we survive. So there has to be something great about I think it's our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, and the fact we have a more or less free press and free speech. We can at least protest against these blunders, and somehow I'm convinced in my own mind that even this latest venture and disaster will be something we can recover from. Tonight,